by the time I got there, just riding up on our dam and looking across, the wind was blowing probably like sustained like 40 miles an hour. I mean, there was already fire probably only like a half mile from the shop. For the East Coast, that was definitely the craziest fire behavior I know I had seen.
We immediately realized that this thing had just escalated and no one was going to get any sleep for a while. Everyone was very defeated. There were some folks that were very emotional because you'd worked all day to try and make sure this thing didn't get out of control, and it just really exploded.
Okay, we're getting ahead of ourselves. That moment of defeat when a wall of fire exploded through the watershed like a jet engine, that was still days away. What started as a 10-acre fire on a mountaintop was about to become one of the largest wildfire responses in South Carolina history. This is part 2 of our deep dive into what would soon be called the Table Rock Complex Fire. And yes, we'll explain that complex part later. But first, let's jump back to day 2, Saturday morning, March 22nd, when the fire was just still small enough that maybe, just maybe, they could stop it. Here's Lee Berry, the Forestry Commission pilot who became the eyes in the sky.
So that Saturday, I was tasked to start being overwatch of that area in our forestry aircraft. So I took off about 1 o'clock in the afternoon and orbited the area, coordinating with these Dauntless single engine air tankers and the SLED agency's Bell helicopter, all 3 of which were dropping water on the fire that was at that point isolated to the top of Table Rock Mountain. One of my primary things as Overwatch is looking for the fire spreading, spotting. So I observed the fire start in the saddle off the top of the mountain. And we put every asset immediately on trying to put that out, but it just started spreading down both sides of the ridges. And there are houses just to the east of that area.
What made this spot so dangerous, it wasn't just the steep terrain. Right next to Table Rock State Park sits the Greenville watershed, 10,000 acres of protected forest that supplies drinking water to hundreds of thousands of people. So, while aircraft drop water from above, firefighters like Austin Williams from Greenville Water hiked up the mountain with hand tools, still hoping that they could contain this thing.
So we got a group, I don't know, it was 15 or 20 of us that went in up top that first day. And honestly, just looking at it from the ground, we knew we had aircraft coming. We knew we were going to work with the single engine, the air tankers and the helicopter. And I was like, man, I really think we might be able to keep this up top and kind of knock it out this first day and it, not be too big of an issue. And then by the time we got up there and started working on it, we were like, well, this isn't, we're not going to catch this. And that was with the wind and the humidity the way it was, there's just really no way we were going to keep it up there. And the issue with where it started was as soon as it came off the top of the rock, you're looking at at least a 5,000 acre box to keep it inside just due to access. And so kind of knowing that changes your game plan a little bit.
Also on that mountain that day was Mackenzie Boyd, a conservation technician with Greenville Water. For her, this wasn't just another day at work. It was her first wildfire.
My only fire experience has been with prescribed fire over the last couple of years. So I have had no experience fighting wildfires. So I didn't really know what to expect. And I was like, wow, I really feel like I'm in a movie right now. Just how intense the situation was with those, the planes flying over, dropping water, and how just seeing the fire behavior and how quickly things would change and fire would jump over the line. And it was a crazy situation and quite the learning experience.
That's the moment Daryl Jones knew they needed to call in the heavy artillery. What Lee was seeing from above meant this fire was about to outgrow everything he had on hand. It was time to make some calls.
When I started asking for aircraft, initially, I had the 2 contract ones I have, but I went to the National Guard because we train the National Guard one weekend a year. We get a drill weekend, and we train the Blackhawks and Chinooks, and I buy the buckets that they carry, and we do training to make sure they know how we work. And I fly a bunch of them, and we train. But to get the National Guard, I have to get the governor to approve that request and put the National Guard on state active duty. So they have to be put on state orders to be able to come fight a state fire. And they're not free. I mean, it's a cost.
Within 24 hours, South Carolina had assembled an unprecedented aerial fleet. The 2 contract Fireboss planes, at least 2 Black Hawk helicopters, 2 massive Chinook helicopters, and even a state law enforcement division helicopter on its very first firefighting mission.
And each of these aircraft bring a different amount of water. So the Firebosses, ours are 600 to 800 gallons. The Blackhawks are somewhere around 700 gallons, maybe 780. The Chinooks are about 2,000 gallons load, and the Sled's helicopter, the Bell 412, is about 300 gallons of load. So, if you've got 0 water on the side of a mountain, a gallon of water is a big deal. And so it slows it down. It provides a lot more margin of safety for our firefighters on the ground.
By the end of the week, South Carolina would have 12 to 13 aircraft working this fire simultaneously. And coordinating all that, initially, that fell to Daryl Jones.
I was running the aircraft for the first days of this fire because we didn't have anybody else available to do it. But basically, I would say, the helicopters stay at this altitude to work on the east side of the fire, and the air takers work on the left side of the fire or the west side of the fire, and they stay at this. You separate them by altitude and distance, and so there's a way to basically air traffic control over the fire to make sure they're not conflicting with each other and still able to do something. And those two, we call them fire bosses. They scoop water. The contract ones, they're big. I mean, they're 60-foot wingspan and about 18 feet tall. They're fairly large planes, but they scoop water. And they were picking up off of Lake Jocassee the first day. And they never stop. They're 70 miles an hour skimming the surface of the water to fill up their tanks. And they come off the water and get up to altitude, and they drop the water at about 140 miles an hour at 60 feet above the trees.
Here's what made those contract planes so valuable. Daryl could have them in the air literally within 15 minutes of making the call. Each plane could scoop 800 gallons. Think about that, 800 gallons from the nearest lake, then drop it at 140 miles per hour, just 60 feet above the flames. Wow. But on Sunday, March 23rd, everything changed. A second fire ignited just miles away, the Persimmon Ridge Fire, also human-caused. Now, Daryl wasn't just managing one mountain fire, but coordinating 2 separate blazes in some of South Carolina's most rugged terrain. That's when it officially became the Table Rock Complex Fire. And the nightmare scenario? These fires merging into one.
We had the Table Rock Fire, and then that Persimmon Ridge Fire started just a few miles away. We were focused on Table Rock. We had a lot of, plans and stuff. And all of a sudden, as I drove up that morning, somebody called me and said, "Hey, there's a new fire. You're about to pass it." I looked, I said, "Oh my God, there's another fire." So all of a sudden, this plan we had for Table Rock, we were having to divide and conquer and send some of our resources that fit our neat, kind of really cool plan and say, "You guys have to find out what's going on with this new fire, and we need to plan on what's going to happen with that one." And the big fear sort of for me was that those 2 fires became one. And the other thing was there were a lot of houses between the 2, and the worst place to be anytime is between 2 fires that meet. The intensity goes up, the oxygen just gets consumed, and there's embers everywhere. It's a bad place to be. And so, we looked at
all that happening and said, if these two burn together, we're losing homes. We need to evacuate, and we need to. So we evacuated everybody between the two fires, basically.
With homes scattered between the two fires, evacuation orders went out immediately. The fire had grown to 6,100 acres and remained at 0% contained. What had started as a challenging but manageable incident was now threatening to become more. But for Austin Williams and the Greenville Water team, the complex fire created another layer of complications. They weren't just trying to protect homes and forests, they were safeguarding the drinking water supply. And that meant some of the most powerful firefighting tools were off the table. We asked them about the pinkish red flame retardant that's so crucial in fighting wildfires.
Yeah, no, that's a great question, and we do actually not allow it in the watershed. We have a fire response plan that got written about 10 years ago that just kind of details everything that, best practices, some stuff called MIST, which is basically minimal impact suppression techniques that we try to implement on the watershed just to protect water quality. And so some of that looks like trying to keep heavy equipment out of, the major tributaries and creeks, having disinfectant for the buckets and the scoopers and stuff, but then also just really basically asking them not to use retardant anywhere in the watershed. And that goes for the pink stuff that they're dropping out of planes, but there's also some additives that they can put in the tanks of those scoopers to kind of make the water go a little further.
All right, just think about that for a moment. While firefighters everywhere else could use this fire retardant, that red chemical slurry that could stop a fire in its tracks, Greenville Water's watershed was essentially just a no-fly zone for this type of drop. Only pure water was allowed. The retardant contains phosphorus-based chemicals, and I get that, potentially could be harmful.
We have an MOU with forestry that we're communicating with them daily. They know what our expectations are and try and work with us on that. And basically their one caveat is always, we're going to do whatever you guys want unless there's personnel, safety, something that comes up like that where it's like, hey, we've got to use this to protect life and property. And, we understand that if it comes to that.
But there was someone else watching all of this unfold who brought a unique perspective to the scene. Max Stone is a wildlife photographer and the executive director for Natural Land Trust, a nonprofit that protects special places here in the upstate. He now found himself documenting one of the largest wildfire responses in South Carolina history.
You have these Blackhawks flying overhead, grabbing water out of the reservoirs, going and dumping them. It was very interesting. A lot of the folks that were there, I talked to the firefighter and you say, hey, how many wildfires have you been on? And they say, oh, this is my first one. So, upstate South Carolina doesn't get a ton of wildfires, but this one was particularly dangerous because it was so dry. You had so much debris from Helene. So everyone was kind of on pins and needles saying, when is this thing going to take off? And that afternoon, people were talking about how we hope the South Saluda holds. We hope the South Saluda holds, which is the river that flows into the Table Rock Reservoir. And if the fire jumps over that river, it was kind of off to the races. So everyone was hoping that river would hold that fire. But because of all the downfall from Helene that happened in September, nobody was really optimistic that the river would hold. There's just so much fuel on the ground. And yes, a lot of the big trees were green and probably wouldn't burn, but there's a lot of stuff that was that did come down that wasn't big trees, that was small limbs that definitely burned. And that afternoon, major winds came through, these massive gusts of 30 to 40 mile an hour knot winds funneled into the watershed. And we were standing on top of the ridge there on Piney Mountain, and all of a sudden you just can't see anything. It's just a wall of smoke and the sound, I looked around thinking, what the heck? What is that? What is that sound? And one of the wildfire firefighters came up and said, that is the sound of fire. I said, that is fire? I don't see anything. They go, yep. And it said, basically the entire watershed just ignited. So it had carried that fire from around Table Rock into the watershed, and it was just an immediate explosion. I mean, it's hard to communicate what the sound was like, but it was like a jet engine, just of fire funneling into the watershed. No one was concerned for their safety, but it then turned the fire into a whole new animal, a completely different animal. We immediately realized that this thing had just escalated and no one was going to get any sleep for a while. Because you'd worked all day to try and make sure this thing didn't get out of control. And, the elements you can't control the elements. And it just really exploded everything. So once it gets on the other side of the reservoir, the reason why people were so distraught and why it then escalated into a whole different animal is because there is very little access on that side of the reservoir. No good dozer lines, no good access points, just a very steep mountain up to the North Carolina border on which to climb and to gain speed and to burn fuel. And so, from that point on, as soon as that happened, I'm standing on the ridge and I started calling my friends that I knew who had homes in Caesar's Head. And I called them and I said, you need to get the things you love most out of those homes and you need to leave.
The Saluda River had been their last best hope, a natural fire break that everyone prayed would hold the line. For days, firefighters have been saying, we just hope the South Saluda holds. But on Tuesday afternoon, that hope evaporated. Here's what that moment was like for the Greenville Water team.
Everything was going really well. I think that day I pretty much sat in front of that line for 10 hours, just inhaling a bunch of smoke and watching it. Later in the afternoon, learned that the fire had jumped the South Saluda River and was burning across the lake. And that was quite the surprise.
Yeah, that was crazy. I mean, just riding up on our dam and looking across, the wind was blowing probably sustained 40 miles an hour. And there was already fire probably only a half mile from the Shaw.
By Tuesday night, the Table Rock Complex fire had exploded now to 13,000 acres with 0% contained. Wind gusts were intensifying, humidity had dropped to a bone-dry 23%, and reality was setting in. But this isn't where our story ends. In our final episode, a supertanker arrives for the first time ever in South Carolina. A community rallies and firefighters make their final stand. Subscribe now so you don't miss the conclusion and check the show notes. I know I say this all the time, but for this one, really do check them because there are some incredible photos from Max Stone and the South Carolina Forestry Commission. Those images are unreal. Thanks again for listening to The Outfall. Without y'all, we wouldn't be doing this. So high five.